You came on the Nordic radar in the beginning of 2019 already. So the initial signs of Memfault in my inbox is actually from February 2019. So
that's very early. The company was 1 month old.
That's very fresh.
That's really, really fresh.
As a startup founder, one thing that I've really taken to heart is that when faced with a big decision, the best thing you can do is to make the right decision, of course. But you don't have a crystal ball, so you can't do that every time. So it's important to remember that the next best thing you can do is to make the wrong decision, because the worst thing you can do is to make no decision at all.
By luck or by skill or good vision and strategy, the moment that Apple decided to include Bluetooth Low Energy in the iPhone was that trigger that just set off the insane growth for Nordic Semiconductor. We understood that the promise of IoT isn't in 5 big companies, it's in the thousands and thousands of developers and companies out there who's going to build products we don't know yet what is going to be, right?
Welcome to Coredump Sessions, the podcast for IoT leaders, firmware engineers, and embedded systems enthusiasts. Each episode, we bring you insights from the leaders and innovators shaping the future of connected devices. We'll talk about what's breaking, what's working, and what it really takes to build reliable products at scale. Let's jump in.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coredump with Chris and Francois. This is an extra episode, which we are doing in order to announce some very, very exciting news from Memfault, which is that Memfault is being acquired by Nordic Semiconductors. This is an amazing development and a great step in our journey. We've been working very hard to get to this point and are so excited for what's to come. And in order to share a little bit about this today, we invited Kjetil from the Nordic team to come, talk to us about Nordic, the history of Nordic, the acquisition, why it makes sense, and how we see the future coming together. So, Kjetil, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, and welcome you guys to Nordic Semiconductor.
We're very excited. Kjetil is currently the EVP of Strategy and head of the PMIC business unit at Nordic. After working for 15 years in various technical and marketing positions related to MCUs, wireless technologies, and other things at Atmel Corporation and Texas Instruments, he joined Nordic in 2015 as a product manager and eventually took over all of product management in 2019. Kjetil's calling us from Oslo, so thank you for joining us at the end of your day.
No worries.
My name is François Baldassari. I'm the founder and CEO at Memfault. And joining me, as always, is my co-founder, Chris. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Very excited.
All right. So, of course, we're all a little bit sleep-deprived and very excited, but we're going to start from the beginning, Kjetil. I want to talk about Nordic. So how did Nordic get started? What's the origin story of Nordic itself?
So now that this obviously go way beyond my time in Nordic, which is now closing in on 10 years. So Nordic is actually a 40-year-old company started in the beginning of the 80s. So a lifetime ago. I'm not sure if you guys were even born at that.
No comments. No comments.
But it started out with like many other companies doing design services for other companies and being in the services business. And that was a hard place to be. And I've seen the videos and I've seen the images of the early team, how they were doing things and supporting their customers. But that went on for a long time. It was a bumpy ride. One of the founders of Nordic is still with the company. So that is exciting. He was here not too long ago, and you can talk about some of these stories. But
that's quite a journey.
Eventually, this business takes its toll on everyone. So they started to doing more ASIC type product going into the IC business. And then I think what everyone who's doing ASIC is starting to figuring out, hey, wait a minute, why am I making it and someone else get to use it and get to enjoy all the fruits of my hard work? And I think every company who's in that phase start to think about the catalog products. And obviously, that's a super, super bold decision for any company to start to go catalog. I mean, you've been through that journey yourself in building up a company from scratch with a go-to-market strategy, with how do you sell, how do you approach customers, and how do you build a team. But they had their eyes on 2.4 gigahertz from a very early day. They were also doing a little bit in sub-1 gigahertz. And there's a funny story. They were two startups back in Norway at that time. So a company called Chipcon and a Nordic Semiconductor, who had been rivals and had people working for each other, racing to get to that catalog stage at the same time. Both doing both 2.4 and sub-1 gigahertz, and ended up that Chipcon landed their first customer in the sub-1 gigahertz space, and Nordic landed its first customer in the 2.4 gigahertz space. And then they went and conquered the world on both those frequency band, those companies. So that was the beginning, proprietary 2.4 gigahertz. There's a story about making or breaking with the initial customer. Not sure if I remember exactly the first customer was, but it quickly went into, I'm not sure if you remember some of this early video gaming stuff where there was some wireless
So these were little transceivers to do point-to-point
super,
0.4
super
gigahertz
simple
links.
RF transceivers, small chips that had a serial interface, had a small register. A data sheet was probably 4 pages long about what you could do with it. But you were able to send something over air and receive it in the other end. So very, very basic versus where Nordic is today.
And are these things still out there? Do people still use these chips?
So some of the earlier chips are probably not the first ones, but we do
Right.
have products that have been on the market for probably more than 20 years.
Wow.
And still selling. So, yeah, I had one of the Nordic sales reach out to me today and ask, when is this obsoleting? And I'm saying, people are still buying it, so we're gonna make it and sell it.
But big jump, even going from these simple transceiver to implementing your current product portfolio, and especially these BLE chips, right? The NRF5 series. So, when did you decide to make a bet on Bluetooth, and how developed was Bluetooth already? How big of a bet was it? Was Bluetooth already clearly an established winner, or did you do this without knowing where we would go?
So Nordic started with Bluetooth before it was known as Bluetooth, right? So being this in the 2.4 gigahertz space, starting to get into, let's say, some of the consumer electronics, it was picked up by Nokia back at the time, and they had a standard they were working on called Vibri, and was the early version of Bluetooth. And they needed a company like Nordic to help them figure out how should this be. But you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the defining moments of Nordic history is when you take that bet. This was probably back in 2006, that we're going to go all in on standardized 2.4 Bluetooth radios or Vibri radios. That standard found its way into the Bluetooth SIG, who embraced it and then started to position it at Bluetooth Low Energy. But obviously, as we know now, that all these standards take time to develop. So 2006 became 2008, 2009.
I remember
challenging times.
2010, and it was like whether or not it was Bluetooth, BLE was going to make it, or Zigbee was going to kind of take over the world was very kind of
very open-ended.
Not determined, really open-ended, yeah.
Extremely open-ended, and obviously a tough period for a company that's trying to regain and by luck or by skill or good vision and strategy, the moment that Apple decided to include Bluetooth Low Energy in the iPhone was that trigger that just set off the insane growth for Nordic Semiconductor. And again, with a very, very simple product. We had the NRF 8000, which was a ROM OTP transceiver-ish that could have some programmability, network processor type of product. It was a very, very odd one, at least seen from the outside, since I was not part of Nordic back then. But it served its purpose, and we started to gain traction.
And also gain capability, like learn how to build these products and learn how to implement Bluetooth and make it low power. I think that's what people sometimes underestimate, is that your first products are about getting something out there and learning from the markets and learning from the technology, building the team you need to succeed down the line. And so sometimes a product exists only to exist, only to get something out there and get some feedback from the market.
That is so true, Francois. And I think a lot of what Nordic is doing is trying to be early and paving the way, knowing that there is a steep learning curve, both for us and for our customers and partners and anyone, but daring to be early and taking bold bets. I think one of the first we have this yearly sales conference in Nordic where we meet all the salespeople in Nordic, and we have this slogan for every year. And I remember one of the first one I attended as Nordic, it was bold and ambitious. And I thought that captured the spirit of a lot of what Nordic is all about. And bold and ambitious, being early and brave to take those often very, very hard decisions that can reap a great reward. And I'm sure you guys have been through a lot of those defining moments with Memfault as well, where you're at the crossroads, but taking a decision and move forward and then react quickly if you figure out it's the wrong way, that's probably the only way to tackle that.
I think as a startup founder, one thing that I've really taken to heart is that when faced with a big decision, the best thing you can do is to make the right decision, of course. But you don't have a crystal ball, so you can't do that every time. So it's important to remember that the next best thing you can do is to make the wrong decision. Because the worst thing you can do is to make no decision at all. There are very few decisions that are one-way doors. Products can be sunsetted, right? Features can be added, and even websites can be updated, brands can be changed, you can call back people and apologize for what you said. Like most things can be corrected somehow, but sitting on your hands paralyzed by choice is deadly.
You don't learn anything that way.
Chris, what's the first Nordic product you got to see? And as an outsider, someone who has been actually an evaluator of Nordic products, maybe even a customer of Nordic, I don't know if you were, Chris, what stands out to you? What are the things that set Nordic apart for you?
Yeah, I mean, don't date back to some of the custom transceiver 2.4 days, but my first experiences with Nordic were with the NRF 51 series that were coming out supporting BLE very early in the days there.
And was that Pebble?
Yeah, and something I always appreciated with my interactions were, my role was I was an embedded engineer. I was responsible for selecting chips we were using, looking at different pieces that were there, and something I always appreciated about the Nordic chipsets and thought process was how deeply the folks I'd meet with would listen about my requirements as an embedded engineer. I want a little bit more debuggability.
You weren't an electrical engineer. You were an embedded person. You were thinking about.
I was very focused on debuggability at the time, because my responsibility was figuring out why Bluetooth wasn't working in the field. And you mentioned sort of the BLE kind of really taking over once it made it into the iPhone. I will never forget the iPhone 4S, which was the first phone that shipped with BLE, because at that time we were enabling support for that at Pebble on a combo chip. We had been using Bluetooth Classic before, and we were very excited about BLE for lower power and kind of different additional applications that were there. But that push to leveraging the BLE components in the field, you really need to understand what's going on and what's in place and what's exposed from the chip to see things, and not all vendors kind of think through that, and the interesting interoperability matrix you run into when there all of a sudden winds up being, I guess maybe that's something that is interesting about BLE, is there's this, once it kind of got into those phones, there's an explosion of different implementations of Bluetooth stacks that all of a sudden started to try to need to talk together, and unraveling that was a big challenge.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys remember very well, and I have distinct memories of certain iOS versions or certain Android versions that was released, and all of a sudden your support calls just went through the roof, and all the issues that people had before someone figured out that either the OS needed an update or the products in the field needed an update.
That was
kind of a terrible time to be going through all this. And if you had your solution back then, it would have made the world so much easier.
I remember we were prepping a major update to our OS at Pebble when iOS 7 came out. And one of our developers downloaded the iOS 7 beta and nothing worked. Many of the new headline features were completely broken. And we were, weeks away from launch. It was a very, very difficult moment for us at the time. So yes, that's the thing when you're in an ecosystem like that with some big players, you're a little bit at their mercy.
I learned that there's also a bunch of features in the BLE spec that I didn't realize were optional, but certain extremely low cost Android phones would just use some gutted Bluetooth stack. And we had a fair amount of users who would buy the low-cost $50 phone, and there were a lot of interesting edge cases to work around to get things to support that.
And that other problem that they had, so these chips that were in the phones were often ROM-based devices. So who needed to solve some of those interoperability issues? Well, that was on the Nordic side and on the accessory side and the people making stacks for them. So I'm sure our Bluetooth team, my Bluetooth stack team, has so many workarounds for all handset chipsets that
it's
just
never
have
the
poor
central's
implementation.
fault. It's always the peripheral, or at least that's what it felt like when we got the support tickets. Just make it work with my phone.
But I think, Chris, to go back on your comment, to go back to your comment about evaluating Nordic chipsets and getting to know Nordic, what really set it apart from my perspective has always been that Nordic, as a semiconductor company, always seemed, or at least for as long as I've known you guys, seemed to take developers very seriously. And oftentimes with chips, so many of the decisions fall to the electrical engineering team or the procurement team. And so the software engineers were not really a key audience. But I think that's changing a little bit. And I've always seen Nordic as being at the forefront of that. Kjetil, is this something that is deliberate? Or was this just something that emerged from your culture or a happy accident? Like, how strategically is that considered?
No, I think this is related a little bit to kind of the promise of IoT, right? So when Bluetooth started to explode and we started to get Fitbits and Polar and Suunto and Garmin starting to embrace some of this low power technology, we understood that the promise of IoT isn't in 5 big companies, it's in the thousands and thousands of developers and companies out there who's going to build products we don't know yet what is going to be, right? So it was a realization on how do we make that extremely broad reach. And back then, I'm sure you remember, to get the datasheet, you had to sign an NDA. That was a typical norm. There were logins on some poorly made web pages or some phone numbers you can call. So I even remember when Nordic decided to just get rid of all the NDAs for pretty much everything and just have it in the open. That was one of those bold moves because no one had done it, right? But just being accessible, and that started to foster this culture, Francois. So I think a part of it is related to our heritage of being Norwegians and just how Norwegians are. But a lot of that is, okay, IoT is going to be everywhere. It's going to be so broad. We need to be accessible. We need to be able to reach everyone. And that quickly became the cornerstone, right? Yeah, I'm not told you about this yet, but we have strong internal strategic pillars kind of defining our culture, and Excite Developers is one of those. And it's also understanding that if this were going to happen, the decision makers would more often than not be engineers and the people building the products, not the people buying the components or the CEO or whoever, right? So if we solve the engineer problems, we have come so far in the decision process and that we make this happen.
I agree.
It's been at the forefront of everything we do, including why we're probably here together today.
I think, I think the recent past has proved you right to some extent, right? Like nowadays we ran a little survey. It wasn't comprehensive, but I think we interviewed maybe 500 leaders at IoT companies. And one of the things that came up is that nowadays about half of their cost is software in getting a product to market. And so software all of a sudden is something they think about a lot when it wasn't in the past. And something that used to happen in the past where, the procurement team would choose a chip or would change a component to squeeze 3 cents out of the BOM. And then the engineering team would end up having to spend 3 or 6 months of additional work in order to fix the software to make it work. That happened to me as an engineer. I had a pin-compatible chip.
NOR flash chip.
NOR flash chip, completely different software support. And I think those kinds of decisions increasingly are being made more thoughtfully because the costs of building the software is becoming very clear. And so having something like the NRF Connect SDK, for example, where I know you all made a huge investment, and something like Zephyr, where things just work out of the box and a lot of the work is already done, I think that really should figure in the math of the investment math of a company that thinks about how they're going to build their products. Are you seeing that happen? Are those conversations actually actively happening, or do you think we're still early in that transformation?
It's twofold. So first of all, it happens for us as a traditional hardware company, right? We also crossed the point where we now have more than 50% of our R&D in software, right? And that is hard for a hardware company to kind of go through. And we still have pain points where we do something where some engineer on our chips just changes a little bit and it trickles down into the software work, and endless discussion about should we design for software or design hardware and let the software adapt as such. We are seeing the same in customers. So we also do customer service, right? And we see more and more all the product makers spend the majority of their time building software. Hardware, making a PCB with a Bluetooth device in 2025 is probably not rocket science. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's not. Building a good product that is stable and reliable and runs smoothly, etc. That's all to software. And the other thing that has happened, I mean, we started talking about Nordic doing this very, very simple transceivers, right, with a few registers, and you can probably run them nicely on 1 kilobytes of non-volatile memory. Today, our most advanced chips have, I'm not sure if you even can count how many internal cores it has, shared memories, shared buses, security systems, etc. They are super complex. And as such, the complexity of software has just increased tenfold, if not 100 times what it was just a few years back, right?
I feel like that's the insight that people missed. And like if you weren't sort of watching or looking out into the future, didn't place the bet on. Because to your point exactly, like there's a point in time where the code I was writing was like 1,000 lines of code. You could functionally verify, everything that was there. It didn't have to interact with sort of the outside world because there was no connectivity.
Yeah.
And overnight, there's this explosion of applications, explosion of complexity. And to some degree, you now have the power of a computer in a form factor that enables crazy applications. And I think a lot of folks miss that and faced a lot of challenges as a result. But to move a company in a direction where kind of getting ahead of the curve, that definitely is a bold bet.
Yes. And I think that's one of the most toughest decisions we've taken is the one where when we took the decision to go away from our old battle-proven NRF5 SDK that was running on the NRF52 series in hundreds of millions of devices, to embrace Zephyr, understanding that was the future, understanding also that Zephyr at the time was not where it needed to be. So actually going actively in and taking our part to develop Zephyr into something that was actually useful. Thanks to other forward-leading companies, and then turning it into a brand new SDKs. Was that insight that you were talking to, Chris? We saw what was happening. I mean, we started out with a 8051s that turned into an M0, that turned into an M4, and the clock frequency went up, and the memory is, oh my God, memory, you can never get enough memory, right?
There's never enough RAM and flash.
I mean, I think I'm a decent embedded software engineer. I still have a hard time wrapping my head around trust zone and how to use it effectively on M33, for example. Very complex subsystems. And as a semiconductor, I imagine you have to think about how do we make this usable for people? How do we make this turnkey? Because if you just give them the spec for the registers to hit to make this, safe or unsafe memory and all that, forget it. They won't do it, I don't think. And it's too bad because those features are very powerful. So we have to empower people to do it. I'm going to move us along because I think we could talk about chips for a while, but we're here to, of course, talk about the partnership and then the acquisition. When I was preparing for this, Shetel, I tried to figure out when was the first time we connected. And it looks like the first email that we had was in February 2020. And I think we'd had to badger you guys. We had, maybe we'll talk a little bit about that meeting. I mean, it was a funny time because I came to Oslo after Embedded World in March 2020, which was the beginning of the pandemic. We didn't know what was about to hit us. I think half of the vendors had pulled from Embedded World. It was a ghost town. Although I think Nordic was there, and then we met some of you in Oslo. But before we talk about some of those meetings, or maybe even the memory is fuzzy, I think it's interesting to talk about why we wanted to have those meetings. Chris, do you remember why we were so intent on having relationships with semiconductors and why Nordic specifically? Do you remember the things that were driving that strategically? Why?
I mean, from our side, there's a couple dimensions there. I mean, something from day one that the people we wanted to reach as well were like the developers building products and getting things in place, and the Nordic brand in the embedded community and kind of like getting the voice out there. much more amplified than kind of a company in the stage we were at that point in time. So from that perspective, sort of getting someone to reinforce the technology and what was there, really valuable. And then from a integration standpoint, something that we were always very focused on is how do we lower the barrier of entry and make it as easy as possible for an end customer to get this type of tooling in place so they can build and maintain better products and get things to market faster. And so there's a deep interest in getting connected with the folks working on Zephyr at the time and the folks working on the NR5 SDK at the time and getting Memfault pre-integrated in there. So there's no work that an embedded developer would have to do to get started. I was, as you were talking about starting about Zephyr in the early days and investing in it, I was actually thinking to the area of Zephyr I invested in the early days was the fault handling. But the person who owned the subsystem at the time, sort of in the repo, was also at Nordic. We had some great conversations back and forth about deep levels of Cortex M fault handling and how to wire that all up.
Right. I remember, the hardest thing in the early days for our business was customers implementing our product. I remember we had early customers who signed contracts with us and then never went live. That was very frustrating. I remember an early board meeting where I called this out as the biggest risk to the business. What if we get everybody excited and they sign contracts with us, but it's actually too complicated and they can't use it effectively, and then they'll walk away from us after a year. And we thought that the simplest way to solve this problem, the best way to solve this problem rather, would be to see if we could be pre-integrated somehow. And this is where talking to chip makers would make sense. There was also, of course, the marketing part. Nordic is such a much bigger business and brand. Having them, doing some marketing together would be hugely beneficial to us. But solving that integration piece was the key one for us. Kjetil, on your side, when we were badgering you and your colleagues with emails to try to get you all to meet with us, was this just, let's hear these guys out? Was there a strategic element to you? Why, and once the partnership started coming together, what was the thinking behind why would this tiny American company making cloud software be interesting for Nordic in those days early on?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I also had to go back and check on those emails, etc. And I mean, I think some of the teams have started to connect and knew about each other's. So there are definitely way more software savvy people in Nordic than myself, who probably had you guys on the radar already. I had to go and check, and you came on the Nordic radar in the beginning of 2019 already. So the initial signs of Memfault in my inbox is actually from February 2019. So
that's very early. The company was 1 month old.
That's very fresh.
That's really, really fresh. But yeah, so what resonated to me, and this is probably more personal than it is for Nordic. I mean, you were connecting me with the software world with your background, right? So the background and the experience you had and the story that you told in that initial meeting, actually being exposed to the problems you solved at Pebble and the Fitbit, etc. That resonated me, right? I'm a hardware guy coming from the hardware world. I uninstalled IAR back in 2010, so that's kind of when I stopped writing software. But obviously being part of Nordic and being part of this, taking the decision on Zephyr and being around a lot of good, smart people, no one had kind of connected this. I would almost call a new way of developing software and deploying software and ways of working, right? I was still stuck in this fix, then ship. While you had, no, that's probably not the way to go, right? You had a different philosophy around it. And that kind of clicked with me that, these guys have come from real experience with and I have to say, immediately very, very strong value proposition. That I as a hardware background person could easily understand. And I think that latched on to culturally wise as well with a lot of the software engineers in Nordic, right? And I think what has been powerful with this partnership that we developed over the years, It's yes, we have met once a year or twice a year, but the engineers to engineers interaction has been ongoing and continuously, right? And they found each other because I think there's a lot of common culture in setting developer and developer experience, and that at the center of everything. So I think it's those engineers to engineer relationship that we should thank for us being here together today, because yeah, that's how we figure out that this is a good match, right?
Yeah, Chris, I think you've really chatted. There's a few Nordic engineers that you talk to, maybe not every day, but every week, right? They're
Yes. Yeah.
constants for you.
It's go ahead.
Can you maybe, Chris, tell us a little bit about you're the person, I think, of the three of us in the room. So Kjetil and I worked on actually doing the partnership and the paperwork and all that. We also built the relationship. One of the great fun of building this partnership has been coming to Oslo every year and getting to know the team over there and building this trust that was so essential to a long-term relationship. But of course, Chris, you did the real work. You helped us integrate SDKs. So what is it that we did? And I think also how did it evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think where did we start? It was just like make it super easy for someone to enable Memfault in the SDK and start to get data that was there. Where did it go? Over time, sort of, I mean, to Kjetil's point, like a lot of the team at Nordic themselves designs the software, builds out the example apps that are in place. And this idea of being able to optimize and tune the apps for power, fixing issues, other things ahead of SDK ships latched onto a lot of the team there. And so some of the best interactions, I worked closely with the R&D team over the years, just internally dogfooding Memfault, using it before NRF Connect SDK versions were shipped, talking about the problems that end users, would want to see too, right? If we're talking about something like cellular, something that's really complicated for folks is understanding what was being sent back and forth between the tower and the device at a point in time when it wouldn't connect or it didn't enter a certain mode. And we were able to kind of get these debugging features that I was asked for as an embedded engineer myself, enabled in the SDK, in part because the R&D team would use it themselves to sort of optimize and get things out there. And so it's been a really great kind of close collaboration. Every NRF Connect SDK release, how do we like tighten the integration here? I don't know if you all, where we started was kind of on some NRF 91 cellular examples. We added Bluetooth soon thereafter over the years, extended that to Wi-Fi, and kind of the internal adoption, that collaboration of like, how do we deepen the insights and the metrics folks have, I think
I think
really
something really
differentiates
cool that started happening is the experts at Nordic started suggesting types of data we could collect with the Memfault SDK. So all of a sudden, this integration became bigger than the sum of its part. You had the Memfault infrastructure and the device vitals, the data we collect out of the box, but also you had folks on the cellular side or folks on the Bluetooth side at Nordic who would say, hey, you should collect this data point. It's really interesting, and your customers will or even, hey, here's a signal that isn't documented necessarily, but we can turn it into something valuable. Or even the modem traces, right? Using the Memfault infrastructure to collect traces from the modem on the NRF9 series so that we can debug what the tower and the modem were doing when there was a connectivity issue. That quickly became, I thought,
there's an expert mode debug. Like most people should start by just fixing the asserts that happen in Zephyr and they don't realize are there in the field. But once you go through the asserts, you start to hit those 1 in 100,000 hour, 1 in 200,000 hour memory corruption bugs, where you just like dereference some null pointer, jump into the middle of nowhere, and you have no idea like what was happening leading up to what's there. And there was a point in time I was kind of talking to one of the folks at Nordic about this feature I think is super cool, this embedded trace buffer capability that I wish existed on the NRF52, but I didn't see it in the data sheet. And if it was there, we could give people basically tracing of exactly what was executing leading up to the crash, because it just writes instructions into RAM, and then you can scoop it up when the system crashes. And they told me that feature actually exists. It's just not something we've kind of like shipped and enabled and put out in the field. And the next NRF Connect SDK, new feature emerged where you can flip it on and get this tracing. And like that's I don't know. I thought that was just super cool for me, that kind of like
Magic of
end-to-end
software.
loop.
You can just turn it on.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what Chris is talking about now, this engineer to engineer relationship, I mean, it resonated within Nordic as well, right? And I remember distinctly, Francois, that once a year you took the opportunity to tell me that the Nordic is a heavy user of Memfault, and we are not paying for it.
That's true. That's true. Finally, we have righted that wrong.
Like a true businessman. No, but it's true, Chris, right? Which is why, and perhaps I'm jumping ahead, but which is why it was so much fun yesterday to announce that we are taking this partnership to the next level. So the
Perfect
enthusiasm
transition.
internally was just really good. People have already connected. They knew about you. They are using you, if not on a daily basis, then on a weekly basis. And there's a level of integration, and it's not in siloed team within Nordic. I think it's fairly widespread. And as I said, half of the Nordic R&D resources is software. So I'm pretty sure it's very wide. So yesterday was a really good day, and announcing this to all Nordicers was so much fun.
I completely agree, and a long time coming. You know, you and I and many others that had to work very hard
Yes.
to get this together. You know, reading through the press release, one of the things we talked about is this concept of a chip to cloud platform. And you know, marketing words are one thing, but what is it that we really mean? So, you know, Kjetil, what's the vision here? How does all this connect into a whole, and why do we think this is important?
So how I think on this is we want to solve as many of the problems for our customers so they can build better products. I think that's at the essence of it. That's why Nordic has built phenomenal hardware over the years. I mean, if you want to run for years on batteries and have ultra low power, but still having a lot of compute and ample memory, etc. So we built really great hardware. I think over the years we built a pretty good SDK and software, although we do know that people are on the fence of Zephyr versus bare metal and FreeRTOS and whatnot. But the software has been a really integral part. But I mean, you guys were right in how software and how you approach software has changed over the years, right? So we were still missing this piece of making this IoT easy and IoT scalable to thousands of customers and developers. Was that how do you maintain and update and manage your products after they ship? And for consumer product, that can be 12 months. In more the industrial space, we can talk about the decades after they ship, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we do, and I'm sure you do as well. Like, work with folks who are like, we have to plan for the next 20 to 30 years on this device.
Correct.
Like, we need to make sure the flash is still good, all the pieces are still there.
No, so it's, and then you talk to people, and when you hear product company that's really on the forefront of innovation and building smart stuff, when they have to spend a lot of resources debugging their hardware or our hardware, Nordic hardware, or working with issues with our SDK, or not working on OTA, etc., that doesn't necessarily make their product better in any way. I mean, for certain fixing issues make them better, but it doesn't change the product from a future innovation standpoint, right? These are essential building blocks that should just work so they can focus on innovation and adding features on their end.
The differentiation.
I think that's the key. Like, it's about realizing that the industry is changing and software is taking a bigger and bigger place. And so, and Nordic is in the business of building the infrastructure or the building blocks to build your custom, unique product on top of. And as software becomes more and more important, what are the building blocks? Well, I think OTA infrastructure, essential building block. Everybody needs it. It's not super differentiated. There is no reason for an OEM to build their own. And so it makes perfect sense that you would provide a solution that works out of the box, that they can just drop in and move on.
Yeah.
And I think it makes especially good sense for a company like Nordic to provide that, because tightly integrating with the silicon and the SDKs, that the SDKs are the glue that binds this all together, is the only way to make it easy for all kinds of customers. And so for me, that's why it made sense to me, is I saw how this would all fit together. I saw the 1 + 1 = 3 in that equation. But this brings us to a really important question, one that I've already received possibly 100 times in the last 24 hours. Are we going to support non-Nordic devices with this? Kjetil, do you wanna answer that question?
I'll answer it, and the short answer is yes. And I mean, our vision in Nordic has always been to build a bigger ecosystem, solve the bigger challenges of IoT. We believe in open standards. We believe in there's room for many. Nordic will never have 100% market share in hardware. We know that, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have 100% coverage of really good, reliable embedded solution for how you deploy and build products. So with that, for sure, we think of this as something that is beyond Nordic. And we have customers out there today who combine chipset even today. And I think you have that and we have that. So how do you cater to that? You can only update the Nordic hardware. That doesn't work. You need to be much more agile and work with the customer again in solving their solution. And a very little known fact is, so we have our own nRF Cloud solution that was more tailored to our cellular business, where we did some device management and some over-the-air updates and have location support. One of our bigger customers on nRF Cloud is a non-Nordic hardware customer.
So you already have that, and I think you and I have talked about this before in the past, Kjetil. But one way maybe to convince people that we must support non-Nordic hardware is to think about the size of the opportunity, right?
Yes.
If we got 100% of Nordic customers using Memfault, we would build a medium-sized business. But if we get a large percentage or even a small percentage of all the devices out there in the world using Memfault and using nRF Cloud, we can build a very, very large business. And I think that that's compelling. And this is because ultimately, I think that adding this software is not just about getting more chips out there. Adding all this software is about building a platform that all together fulfills more and more needs for larger and larger markets. And that's how we build a very large business. And so I think it's not only something that I personally care about. I think it is in our collective interest to serve Linux devices, to serve Android devices, to serve devices who make different silicon choices for their own sake, for their own reasons. And so I'm very, very committed to continuing to support them.
Yeah. And I think, so if you go to the Nordic webpage, we just released an article or a blog post about Zephyr and how we've been working with Zephyr over the years. The amount of commits and the amount of engineers who've been working in that open source community, serving the greater goods of this entire industry, is staggering, right? We have made a major uplifting, and that's kind of where we are. We want to make sure that pie gets as big as possible and the market gets as big as possible. And that means that sometimes you do heavy lifting on the behalf of everyone who's in this space. I'm happy to do that.
We're arriving at time, so I'm just going to ask each of you one final question, which is, what was your favorite reaction to the acquisition announcement so far? Chris, you want to go first?
There were many. I think one of the ones I was most excited about was from Marcus on LinkedIn when he took a pair of Nordic socks off and put a pair of Memfault socks on.
That was
so
a
things are
great
coming
video.
together. That was great.
This Marcus is an engineer at Nordic, but I think if engineering doesn't work out, like social media seems like he's got a future in it. Kjetil, what's your answer? What was your favorite part?
Yeah, no, this is a small one, but I picked up and I think this was on Reddit. This became a discussion on one of the embedded channels there, and someone said, of course, Nordic made the leap to Zephyr and embraced Zephyr for their nRF Connect SDK. Zephyr is full of memory faults, so the solution to that problem is to acquire Memfault to fix them. I thought that was kind of funny.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, thank you both for joining me today. Thank you for
You didn't tell your story, Francois.
All right. I will tell my story. For me, if I can share it, Kjetil, there was a Nordic town hall which I joined, and I started presenting to Nordic employees. And one engineer who should not be named asked whether we were going to bloat every application with some Coredump software that's going to make it even bigger. And I bit my tongue a little bit, but yes, we are. It will be optional. You can always disable it or enable it if you want it.
I'll add one extension to that counterintuitively for many of our customers, when they enable the Memfault SDK, we wind up reducing the RAM footprint, because one of the things that we'll track is how much space is never used in the stacks. If you're allocating a bunch of threads in Zephyr, you can wind up having a lot of tasks and there's a lot of space that just winds up being dead, but everyone's afraid to reduce it, right? Because you might Stack Overflow. But if you know in the field, 500 bytes is never used on 10 stacks, it's 5K right there.
Excellent. Chris, with the amazing response, the precise response to the comment. I think that's as good a place as any to end this conversation. So thank you both, and thank you to all of you listening to us today. We'll be taking questions. I'll be very happy to answer them. And Chateau, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you for joining us late.
Thanks for having
the
me.
day for you.
I think we
I
got
hope you enjoyed
through
the conversation as much as I did.
15% of the stuff we could have covered today. So we'll have to do another one in the future.
Maybe we'll do another.
Maybe we'll do another. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Bye, everyone. All right. So thank you for listening to the videos. We had a number of questions. We're happy to see more. And, we're trying to be as transparent and share as much with all of you as possible. One theme that comes up again and again and again is, are we going to keep supporting non-Nordic silicon? I think that is a super fair question, and I'm excited to talk about it. And the second one is, what are we going to do for Nordic customers? Will there be anything special there? So let me touch on that. It's true that historically, when a semiconductor buys a software company, the playbook they use is they make the software free if you buy their chips and cut off access for others. I remember distinctly, Chris, maybe you remember, when we were at Pebble, we used a Bluetooth library called Bluetopia. Was that right?
Yes. Yeah,
by a company called Stone Street One, I think. And Stone Street got acquired by Qualcomm. And then they told us, sorry, moving forward, you're going to have to use our Qualcomm chips in order to use the Stone Street One Bluetooth stack. And so we were in a lurch having to find a new Bluetooth stack. It was very, very stressful. And the problem with that strategy, by the way, is that when you see software as just an enabler to selling more silicon, then software itself is not a revenue driver. And therefore, you don't continue investing in software. And to remain competitive, software requires continued investments. And so what we find is, if you look at some of the platforms that have been acquired over the past decades by hardware companies, is that by semiconductor companies, is that they tend to get underinvested in because they do not generate their own revenue. So it was very important to me when we were having conversations with the folks at Nordic that we take a very different approach, and that Nordic be very serious about building a large software business of its own. And so we got that commitment from them. And so in fact, we're investing not just more in supporting Nordic, we're investing more in supporting every type of semiconductor. You'll see we're still on the website as partners with ST and Infineon and others, NXP. We want to continue building this partnership. We want to continue supporting this hardware, because actually that's the only way we'll build a big business. And that's the only way that we can justify continued investment at the rates that we are asking for today. So you will see over the next few months more SDK releases with support for more chips across all kinds of semiconductors. You will see the same people, the same level of energy behind all the hardware platforms that we support. And yes, you will see that we will build some integrations that go even deeper with Nordic chips. Not because we don't want to do it with others, but because it will be possible for us to make those integrations. I would want nothing more but to get access to the deep registers and undocumented behaviors of all chips. But here inside Nordic, I'll have the unique opportunity to get that access for Nordic chips to start. And hopefully that encourages other semiconductors to give us that level of access. So if anything, we're better positioned than ever to serve all hardware makers. And we look forward to showing that to you over the next few releases of products. Anything you want to add, Chris?
No, I think that's a great recap, and yeah, definitely something I'm thinking about is what standardized sort of like sets of metrics and deep insights can we collect and then get across the board for all of our platforms.
We also had questions about what can we do specifically for Nordic customers and folks who use Nordic, Zephyr, and BLE. And you will see over the next, there's a wait list to receive pricing and more information on this. Long story short, we will create some special pricing packages that will make Memfault more accessible than ever on Nordic chips. We will, of course, build some tight integration into some Nordic chips because we can. And we've always been members of Zephyr. Memfault is a Zephyr project member, not just in the context of Nordic, but in the context of every semiconductor adopting Zephyr. We're big fans of the platform. And so you'll see us continue to invest in deep integrations in Zephyr. And last but not least, I see Ziv asking about BLE. We have long supported BLE. I think that by number of devices, BLE might still be the number one protocol on the Memfault platform. I don't want to be definitive. I may be wrong, but it's certainly among the top. So we have good support for BLE. We'll continue to make it better. And obviously having access to world-class experts in BLE on the Nordic team who can advise us will only make this support better for everyone.
Yeah, and I'd highlight on that, like an area we continue to double down on is like the metrics that we're collecting in our SDK out of the box that for transports or for particular problems that folks run into in the field. So like when it comes to BLE, what we expect to do is continue to deepen sort of the metrics you get so that if you're trying to optimize for power or trying to understand why random disconnects are happening, those insights will be surfaced right up in the Memfault platform.
A couple additional questions we got. We heard, should I start posting Memfault support questions on DevZone? No, we are not ready for that. Continue using the support at Memfault email for those of you who use Memfault. We will continue to respond. No change there. Will we continue having our SDKs on GitHub? Yes, we will. Our SDKs will continue to be on GitHub. No change there. We continue to work in the open and share as much of our work as possible. And will we support features from Nordic Cloud like MQTT ingestion, etc.? Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know you've been thinking about this. NR Cloud, of course, has great CoAP and MQTT endpoints, whereas Memfault today is HTTP API. Are we going to leverage that, you think?
Yeah, and it's an area I'm really excited about, and cycles back to what we were talking about, I guess, during the webinar about something that we're constantly on the lookout for is how do we lower the barrier of entry and make it incredibly easy to get started with Memfault and sort of get started with building a solution in the first place. So things like services like CoAP, services like MQTT within NRF Cloud, what we want is sort of just out of the box in an example app. If data is being published, it'll be forwarded right along to Memfault, and you won't have to wire up anything on the transport side.
Thank you, Chris. Another question is, will Memfault.com go away or Memfault itself go away? No, none of that is going away. Our application is still hosted on the Memfault.com domain. That is not changing. There will still be websites on Memfault.com. We continue to operate Memfault. The whole team is here with me today. There hasn't been any major changes to the team. So this is still the same group of people building the same products, the same URL, same GitHub repos as before, except that we now have the amazing support of a huge organization behind us. And that feels incredible, honestly. It allows us to think so much further ahead and dream so much bigger. And
the other one I
can be more excited.
The other one I heard is, will our blog interrupt go away, or will these Coredump podcasts go away? But they're both here to stay as well.
Oh, they're too much fun.
Exactly.
I would never stop doing this. I would do it on my own if I had to. I do this for the glory, right, Chris? We love the podcast, we love the Interrupt blog, we love the community that we built, right?
I think that was something that we talked about in the early days of the company was the absence of like a place where people building embedded projects can hang out and talk about the challenges they're facing and learn what's there. And one of the aspects I've enjoyed the most over the last number of years is getting a lot of engagement on some of the content we put together on Interrupt, getting others to involve and write amazing articles of their own. And I'm hoping we can amplify that even more with the bigger team behind us.
You know, there have been many ups and downs over the last 6 years of building Memfault. But one of the highlights, if not the biggest highlight, has been to meet young folks who are entering the industry, who are new embedded software engineers, who tell me they learned about fault handlers, they learned about I2C, they learned about bootloaders, linker scripts, many other things by reading the Interrupt blog. And they felt like they had to figure it all themselves before, and now there is a place where they can learn. It's by no means the only one on the internet, but I think we've built one that people can more easily find out about. And that's been so rewarding because I think one of the things that we really cared about when we started this company was the embedded software engineer as a as a person, as an audience, as as a function to take seriously, to create content for, and to work with, and to build tools to enable. We wanted to make sure these embedded software engineers were not left behind as automation became better and better, and the tools became better and better for the rest of the software engineering discipline. And so having been able to put powerful tools in the hand of embedded software engineers like us, and having been able to create a community where they can exchange and learn, has truly been the honor of a lifetime. And I hope to continue doing this for a very, very long time.
I couldn't put it better myself.
Thank you, Chris. And with that, I think we're going to start wrapping up. Thank you all for joining us today. Once again, a very fun session. We are continuing to do the podcast, so you will see many more. I think we already have the next one scheduled. So you can learn more on our website. We'll start promoting it shortly. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attendance. And if ever you want to come on the podcast and talk to us about something you've been doing, or something you've been building, we're always excited to hear from you. Same thing for Interrupts. Get in touch anytime. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to this Coredump session. If you enjoyed the conversation and want to dig deeper, check out more episodes available wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube or at memfault.com/webinars. If you have any questions for our team, drop us a line at team@memfault.com. Until then, keep shipping. See you next time.